Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan basketball and football writer for The Freak. We put the basketball first during this time of the year. And I am joined, as always, by our producer and editor, Andrew Burkle, who is surviving the snowstorm. I know we talked snow last time to open it up, but I mean, it's like my fiance's got the snow day off work. A lot of people are in. Are you in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a lot. I'm up in Lansing, as you guys know, and it's we got at least 6 inches of snow up here. So I've heard it's more than down in the Ann Arbor area where you guys are, plus Tony, and then obviously one other person joining us today, right?
That's right. I was building to it. In Ann Arbor, I would actually say it was pretty close to 6 inches. Let's ask our Ann Arbor expert aficionado, our hoops expert aficionado, our longtime columnist, the voice of our sports department, our main man, Mr. Hoops himself, Sean Windsor. What's up, Sean? Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, Tony. It's good to be with you. But by the way, let me just tell the listeners that you and I were at a Michigan football game in November, maybe? Had to have been November. I don't remember who they were playing. That night, the Celtics were in town playing the Pistons, and they were up by...
Here we go.
They were up by 20-something, right? And you're just shaking your head. I'm like, you were, I know this isn't a Pistons podcast, but you just, and rightly so, like a lot of Pistons fans, you're like, when is this ever going to turn around? When is this ever going to change? And I remember saying, just give them a little time. They've got a little something. They'd lost some close games at that point. You could just see that they were different. Look, I would be lying if I sat here and say they'd be 3 games over 500 heading into the All-Star break. But you were passionate. I remember that. I mean, you can set your journalism aside for a second when it comes to the pro teams. And you can be objective when it comes to Michigan football and basketball. But I just want the listeners to know that you pay attention to basketball beyond just Michigan basketball, and you care an awful lot about that team over in Detroit, who looks pretty good right now.
I do. And here, I as you said, this is a Michigan Hoops pod, and they have been mighty fun, and we're going to get into all of it for a bit. But just because you opened the door just a little, just 1 minute. Sean, my childhood, right, was the Detroit Pistons. On the last day of 5th grade is when they won, for me, is when they won that 2004 championship, right? Then in all of middle school, they are just dominating. And then even into my freshman year of high school, 6 straight, whatever, Eastern Conference finals. And these are your formative years, right? 11, 12, 13. I mean, you're just idolizing these guys. And the Pistons were so important to me. Sean, they have not won a playoff game since I've had a driver's license. I turn 32 next week. So forgive me if I was a little bit hard on them for being what I called the worst professional franchise for 15 years. And I needed to see it to believe it. And honestly, I kind of said the same about Michigan football 3-4 years ago when Ohio State had run eight in a row or so. I'm like, look, Michigan's making progress. That's good. I can't pick them to win until I see it. Like, I'm going to be wrong whenever it happens first, and then I'll reassess. I couldn't accept the Pistons as taking a step forward until I saw it. But man, Cade and Malik and Duren, they're balling for sure. Last thought on the Pistons before we get to Michigan, Sean.
Yeah, no. The reason I bring them up too, though, is that there's something that's fun about them right now. There's a little magic going on with them. And I would argue that Michigan has got a little bit of the same mojo. They're not coming out of the same desert, right? The circumstances, the context, completely different. But when you watch Michigan basketball, they're fun. They're fun right now. And they've got things that are a little bit different. And that's kind of why I mentioned the Pistons, because when a basketball team, or maybe any team, whatever sport it is you love, when they're kind of coming up and they kind of come out of nowhere a little bit, and there's a chemistry and a vibe that is evident. It's just fun. There are few things to me that are more fun in sports. Maybe only a title, right? Maybe only a title, but a team on the come up is, or a program on the come up, a franchise on the come up is about as good as it gets in sports outside of a parade. And I think that's what you're seeing with Michigan right now. And the context of where they were a year ago to now is pretty startling.
I was going to say, you say they're not coming out of the same desert. It hasn't been as long, but their drought was as in dire need of water, you could say, as the Pistons, right? I mean, 8-24, last place in the Big Ten, worst season in program history, first time finishing in the basement in 5 decades. And then you talk about it. about how fun it is when you're in the midst of that turnaround. Now, next year, it might be a little different, right? Once there's some expectations and things, it feels like the Lions 2 years ago. Even this 15-2 year, I mean, which was awesome and great, you kind of knew that the end game was really going to kind of tell the story of this thing. But 2 years ago, when they finally won the division, when they're knocking teams off and they're on the pursuit, it was euphoria, right? And that's what this Michigan basketball team feels like. 5 wins in a row, all between 2 and 4 points. Other than one blowout loss in Purdue, Sean, which they obviously just avenged, and I want to hear your thoughts on that. Even their losses have all come by 2, 3, or 4 points. So 22 out of 23 games, or 23 out of 24 now, I think it is. I mean, they've been awesome, like really good. And everyone has an off night. So, I mean, just their consistency. What is that what strikes you the most, or what's the most fun or the best part of this Michigan team in your eyes?
Well, there are a couple things. One is just the Danny Wolf, right? A point center out on the floor with a traditional center in Vlad Golden. That's fun. Just that combination. I mean, running, picking rolls. It's not really picking pops. Somehow, look, Golden can shoot a little bit. That's what's fun, seeing all that size. One guy handling the ball, one guy handling the screen. And we've obviously seen that from the beginning of the year. So that's part of it. I like their mental toughness. You know, the Purdue game was a really good example of that, right? They were down the whole game, came back, took a 1-point lead a couple times, fall back down, right? They clawed back in late in the first half. Trying to remember what they were down 7 or so. And they were down.
And they were down 10 twice.
They were down 10, a couple points in the first half, but maybe later it was 7. They cut it to 2. Purdue comes out and scores the first 5, 6, something like that. So again, they're back down, and it's just to keep coming. And even though it was only single digits for most of that deficit, to keep coming to me shows a lot of grit. To borrow Dan Campbell word. And by the way, no, the Desert's not anywhere near the same dude. They were in. So Howard's first year was what, COVID, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to remember. And then they get to the Elite 8, and then they get to the Sweet 16. I was at that game in San Antonio when they lost to, I think, Villanova. So that was just a couple of years ago. 3 years ago? That Sweet 16. So they went Elite 8, Sweet 16. And then did they make the tournament and then fell off?
No, 2 missed tournaments. Two missed tournaments. It was
so that's 2 years. So that's 2 years. And I get it. You know, the Michigan fans have been used. I mean, Beeline had a remarkable run. But yeah, I don't think that if you look at the last 15 years of the programs, I don't think we're talking about different levels here. But anyway, no, it's just, you talk to these guys, you're around a little bit more than I am, obviously, maybe a lot more, but it's the way they problem solve, and it's the way they keep coming, and they got some gritty guys. I mean, you know, it's not just the big guys either. I think Donaldson is a huge part of all this. I like his makeup a lot, aside from his skill.
Oh, he is tough as nails. Sean, I imagine you knew this. If you didn't, most of our listeners may or not. I'll say it either way. He was a 4-star safety recruit out of Tallahassee, and many people thought he was going to play football. Like, he was like top 275 in the country, had SEC offers, the whole thing. And that's how he plays basketball. Downhill, just brings it, goes behind his pads. But, oh, by the by, this dude he can shoot it. I mean, that was my question about Donaldson coming in. When someone is so athletic, so big and strong and herky jerky and can get downhill, you just wonder how refined their shot is. He's one of the best. That when they were down 65-61, 3 minutes left, and he just drills from the right wing, 25, 27 footer, and you felt good about it when it came off his hand. And just, if you want to talk about their genetic makeup or what have you, right? Or the team's makeup, a lot of it starts with Donaldson. And he kind of put his foot in his mouth going into West Lafayette. I wrote about it because I thought personally he was talking kind of crazy. And I've talked about it on this podcast before. He was like, yeah, I mean, I've played at Rupp. I've done this, I've done that. Like, I don't get, like, in the Big Ten, they care about arenas. Like, I don't get what the big deal is. Well, now you understand what the big deal is, I think, right? And then we're at Indiana last weekend, and I'm talking to him post game, and it's like, hey, Purdue's coming back. Thoughts, this, that. He said, no comment. He knew he had said too much the first time. He wasn't going to do anything. And he's just, let's let this play do the talking this time. It's just little growth like that. And one more for you, Sean. You talk about how they were never down more than 10 this game. Even that was very different than what they have been experiencing this year. In 17 of their games, they've been the one with a double-digit lead. And all too frequently, it's collapsed and then they've survived. But for them to be on the other side of it and just find a way, that to me, not just because it's Purdue, but because they were the one clawing back, not the one getting out to a lead and just kind of surviving against a Penn State, a Rutgers, and Indiana. These are not tournament teams. To do it that way against Purdue, to go into first place in the Big Ten, at this point of the year, I mean, you just got to be so thrilled if you're a Michigan fan.
Well, no, to me, the other biggest shot Donaldson's hit is against Iowa, which they, to your point, they led for a lot of that game, right? And Iowa got back into it, and Donaldson had a huge step back three toward the end of that game. And I think he even had a steal or maybe a clutch rebound to kind of help seal that. Do you remember? I mean, all of a sudden,
he's done a lot. He scored the final 7 or 8 points. I mean, Danny scored the final 7. I mean, they've all taken turns, and now there've been so many tight games. It's escaping me. I think it was against Oregon where Donaldson scored the final 7, 8 of the game, and he really sort of willed them to victory. I mean, he has done it on multiple occasions.
You know, I hear people questioning their guard play, and maybe that's fair in a way, but I to me, he's not Braden Smith, but who is, right? I mean, he was obviously Purdue's point guard. He looked great the other night. He's one of the best point guards, if not the best point guard in the country, not just the Big Ten, but Donaldson is a huge part of this team, and he's fearless and he plays that way. And, you know, they've got several of these guys. I like their guards. And here's the thing about Michigan. If their guards are going to make shots at all, if Marvin Burnett is going to make a few threes, which he is capable of, I know he doesn't do a whole lot more, and he's a catch and shoot guy for the most part. He plays hard, but if they're going to make a few shots, they can go deep in the NCAA tournament. Deep.
No, they can. They can. There's one guy they're working on getting his shot going, and we'll talk about that lineup switch in just a minute, but I just wanted to correct myself. I apologize, guys, for not remembering this off the top. It was Penn State. Michigan was down 5 against Penn State with less than 2 minutes to play. And then Trey assists Roddy on a back cut for a dunk to make it 72-69. Then off an inbound, he hits a jumper from the elbow. Then he hits a three-pointer with 24 seconds left, down 1 to go up 2. Then he gets the defensive rebound off the Penn State miss and drills both free throws to ice the game. He had 21 and 7 assists with no turnovers that day. I mean, so that's just, it's not just this last game, right? Trey's done this before, but you're right.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of Penn State. Maybe I was thinking of Penn State, not Iowa.
But Sean, you were totally right about Iowa, because Iowa, there are so many of these games, Sean. They led Iowa by 15 or 17 as well in the second half, who came all the way back. I mean, it is time and time again that this happens. So you are excused from how I see it for not remembering which exact game it was. But the point remains about where they are, just overall. And you want to talk about guards, wings a little bit, because that's been a big. I mean, that's kind of what some people might call the sticking point. Do they have enough guard play? They say guards win in March. The question is, does Michigan have enough guard play? Can't you argue that Danny Wolf, you talked about, I mean, as the point center, that's another guard type. He moves the ball. He dribbles the ball. He can set up the offense from the outside or the inside. I mean, he can bring it up court. I mean, just because you're 7 foot doesn't mean you can't function like a guard.
No, he went and got a bucket he drove down. I don't remember how much time was left. It was late against Purdue. He had a critical layup, right? In that sort of back and forth stretch, down the stretch. And he could do that. I'm trying to remember. I think it was off a ball screen up near the top, and he just used it and went and got a layup out of it. That's what guards do. And he does that. I mean, he's not going to do it maybe quite as much, but yeah, these days, the way you throw terms around, the players are so much more interchangeable. You see this at every level of basketball. I don't know what the skill big guys have these days. Sometimes I don't know that you can say you have to have guards in the traditional sense to win. You need somebody that can make plays. How about that?
Right. And Danny Wolf is averaging like 12 and 10, and with 4 assists, I think he makes plays.
Yeah, you need playmakers, and it doesn't matter where it comes from in a way. Right? That's just kind of how basketball is. It's fun if you like freedom and flow and movement and all that. And that's the way these guys play a little bit too. It's also why they turn the ball over a little bit. They're not quite as precise as the Beeline teams were, or even the Howard teams. They were a little bit more deliberate, but this team has a lot of fluidity to it. And sometimes you're going to turn the ball over, right?
Is those turnovers, Sean, is that why you think they've played so many close games? I just looked it up. They are 8-4 in games decided by 4 points or less. First of all, the fact that they've had 12 games where they've been decided by 4 points or less is like bananas. What do we, basically not even 30 games into the year here. I mean, or 24 games of the year and 12 of them have been decided by 4 points or less. But why do you think they get in so many close games like that? Is it the turnovers? And do you think they've figured something out as far as closing these things out versus earlier in the year when they lost to Arkansas, lost to Oklahoma? Do you think they've kind of ironed some of that out, or are they just getting a little bit lucky right now?
Well, I think the other night's a good example when they played Purdue. I want to say they had 8 turnovers in the first half off the top of my head, and I think they only had 2 or 3 in the second half. I think the box score said 3. May have said 2. Dustin may have said 2 after the game. I'm not sure who was exactly right there, but they were a little bit more purposeful in the second half. And the comebacks, to me, the turnovers are part of it. They're a solid defensive team, not a great defensive team. That's part of it, right? So you're susceptible to runs. I mean, in a game that's made of runs anyway. And they're good. I mean, and they're talented and they're good, but they're not dominant, right? There's just a lot of parity. And so to me, that's the other part of it. They're good enough to play with anybody. They're also good enough to not quite good enough that they're going to hang around. I mean, a lot of other teams are going to hang around. And I think that's just the nature of college basketball right now. I mean, outside of, I guess Connecticut the last couple of years, right?
And Dusty said it earlier this week, right? He's like, look, I'm just happy that we're at a point where we are nitpicking the fact that we're not holding on to these 10-point leads that we get every game, right? Like, I'm just pleased that we're up by double digits more often than not. And we're winning most of these games, right? Like, these are great problems to have. Every team in the country has a problem right now. This is exactly the problem that we want to have right now. And I want to talk, first place, closing this thing out, Big Ten, what the rest of it looks like. And we can get into Michigan specific a little more, but let's take a quick break, pay some bills, and then we will come back. Don't go anywhere. This is Hell Yes. All right, welcome back. We are joined on this episode, of course, by Sean Windsor, our columnist. And Sean, we're going to look ahead. They're Michigan, first place in the Big Ten, 11-2 in the league, 7 games remaining. But first, the man I think who should get the most credit for the fact that Michigan is in this position. We've mentioned his name a couple times in passing, but we have not golf clapped and given his flowers or whatever the kids say. Dusty May, the Michigan head coach, who has come in and done a number on this program from top to bottom. Give me your thoughts on the job Dusty's done. I mean, I know you met with him, right? Didn't you got to meet with him like I did before the season? I remember you sat down with him, and I wonder if your thoughts, how have your thoughts evolved as we've gotten to see what he's done and what he's been about?
Well, there are a few things. One, he's really smart, intuitive, and he's very curious. And I remember thinking that when we talked. Not too long after he was hired, he's curious about other human beings, and he talked a lot about that and what he learned when he was just at every stop he's been at. But even, and I forgive me, I can't remember the name of the podcast or the book that he referenced, but it was about communication and sort of understanding how society changes around you and evolves and adapts, and how you have to kind of change and adapt with that. And I think he's done that in a couple of fronts. One, just communicating with 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds, no matter how old you get, figuring out how it's changed behind you and adapting to that. And 2, the game itself. We see so many coaches that struggle with that a little bit, or don't believe in some of the things that happen that change on a macro level in college sports, particularly college basketball. There's a coach up the road that has struggled with that a little bit, about an hour north of Ann Arbor. And not adapt. I'm not saying adapting to the game with Tom Izzo. I'm just saying he has certain beliefs. They're antithetical to the transfer portal, to a lesser degree NIL money, but it's more about the transfer portal, about ideas about sticking with things and learning and failing and learning from the failure in that place instead of going right. I had a throwaway line in my column the other day, not a total throwaway line, about how in this era of the transfer portal and NIL, you can rebuild quickly within a year, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Like, right? We shouldn't take what Dusty May is doing for granted and assume that it's easy. Because you still have to build a team and a culture. And how many guys are new? 10?
Sort of. Really, I mean, rotationally, it's about 6 or 7 or 8.
It's 6 or 7,
depending how deep you go. But I mean, all their star. I mean, other than Namari and Trey, I'm sorry, Namari and Will Cheddar. I mean, they play 9 deep, and the other 7 are
four
of
their starters are new. And here's the thing, coach used to come in to a situation like this, and you always said, well, he needs a few years because he's got to get his kids in. He's got to recruit. And you're talking about freshmen, unless you hit it like, Fisher did with the Fab Five or Calipari used to do when he'd reload. But his best teams always had some juniors and seniors on them to kind of mix in with the Anthony Davises of the world, right? And that took a minute. And it's so you can do it more quickly now, but you still, what are they coming to? What kind of culture are they coming to? And if you're new too, you got to build that on the fly. So everybody's has to adapt and figure it out together very, very quickly, because I think the expectations are a little bit different too, right? You come to a place like Michigan, look, it's not Kentucky, but still you got to show some signs. I don't think anybody thought Dustin May's got to come in here and get to the Final Four his first year and compete for the Big Ten and win the Big Ten doing what he's doing. But he had to show something. And he talked about that and he was open about that. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. And I was going to say, just because we didn't expect that right away, I don't think they did. I don't think exactly. They didn't think that was out of the question. They were just going to be quiet and put their head down, right? And just, we're going to do our thing.
Because you can go get Danny Wolf. And you can go get Vlad Goldie, bring him with you. You can go get the Trey Donaldson, right?
I was just on the phone with Roddy Gale last night. I will have a one-on-one coming out with him just ahead of his return to Ohio State, where Michigan travels this weekend to Columbus. He had some really insightful things, I thought, to say. And even the way he talked about Dusty May, I mean, just pitching it, right? And I mean, him sort of kind of he's like, hey, I know Trey's coming. I mean, Vlad's gonna come with him. Kind of hearing whispers of this Danny Wolf thing. I think I could be another piece in this, right? And so they were seeing it ahead of time, in my estimation. And I know what's funny is what Dusty didn't know, Sean, when he was talking to you and talking about all these philosophical things, he had no idea that he was whispering sweet nothings into your ear and how much you subscribe to that. That's number one. Number two, just the way he still kept this together. Emotionally, and how they talk about, I mean, you were there, right? When I asked him after the game, are you allowed to be proud of this, right? Like, I mean, this worst to first sort of thing, beating Purdue, top 10 wins, no matter what happens from here. The fact that this program, this culture, there's turnaround, there's buy-in. He was like, oh, absolutely not. He's like, but what I am proud of is it seems like the guys still want to be together. They're still having fun. They're still learning. They're still practicing. He won't stop. This guy will not stop trying to learn, trying to be better, and telling the players that if you are not happier for your teammates' success than your own, then we will not go to San Antonio. You have to be able to accept anyone doing it anyway on any night, and they're buying that. And Roddy Gale moving to the bench, quote unquote. That's air quotes for those who aren't watching on the video feed. I mean, it just Andrew and I were talking about this pre-show. It just seems to make sense. They had plenty of offensive punch in the starting lineup. You don't need a Roddy Gale who's dominating the ball, who's driving to the rack. You need a Reuben Jones, a connector, a facilitator, length, right? And with Trey and Danny and just even them buying into that. And it's only been a couple days, but Reuben and Roddy both had their best game maybe against Purdue. And Roddy's talking about how on the phone, he's like, man, they gave the Bradley Beal comparison in Phoenix with the Suns. Just he can't play like he wants to when Devin Booker and KD are on the court. There's just one ball. There's not enough to go around. So how about you come off the bench, and as soon as you come in, we want you to score. Go be aggressive, right? And you're not fitting in. You're attacking. And I think that's opened something for Roddy.
Yeah, maybe Phoenix isn't the best example, but the Suns are. I mean, in theory, it makes sense. My last thought on Dusty May is just it doesn't matter how you are as a coach as long as you connect and understand your guys and fit what you have to your guys, at least to a degree. He's relentlessly positive, and I would err on that side in this day and age and in our culture, right? I think it makes a difference. And you're right. Those are, when he talked about all that stuff when he got hired, of course I love that, because to me, that's what makes it. Unless you have a team that is so physically gifted that it doesn't matter to a degree. Or, JB Bickerstaff, I think it was JB Bickerstaff, the Pistons head coach, was talking about, and I don't know that he came up with this. I've heard this before, but he mentioned this the other day with the Pistons. If you're talented, but you're not connected, the odds are you're going to underachieve. If you're not that talented, but super connected, the odds are you're going to overachieve. And that's generally true. And I'm not saying Michigan's overachieving.
The Tigers?
I think they're kind of getting everything out of their talent, right? But they're both. They have good talent, not dominant talent, not top of the lottery talent, but they have good talent, and they're really connected. And that's the makings of a Final Four team and a Big Ten winner. I mean, you look at the rest of the schedule. You want to talk about the Big Ten? I mean, I feel like they can lose 2 games and still win it outright. I mean, that's kind of the position.
Thanks to Michigan State collapsing against Indiana, right?
I think at the end of the day, it's about being consistent and being yourself, right? Like Juwan, I think the problem that he kind of ran in towards the end was that he was kind of inconsistent, right? Like he was treating different people different ways, and people saw that. And he would be really chill sometimes, and then totally over the board another time. Where Dusty is consistently chill and, kind of has that California vibe about him, and then it can work the other way too. Like, I think what people like about, Izzo up the road is that he is consistent, right? He's consistently intense and consistently on your, all the time. And that he's going to be, you can expect that whether you're Draymond Green or the last guy on the bench, and I think that's what, like, you look at Dusty, man, you're like, oh, this guy, he gets it, right? He just gets it. And Michigan's at this point, their biggest concern might be, trying to keep him around, because he's a pretty young dude and he's going to have options, you know what I mean? And he's shown that he can do a quick turnaround, and whether it's him or the guys working for him, he knows how to identify talent. That's the other thing too.
He does. And I mean, we'll see what happens. Alluding to Indiana, his alma mater, where Mike Woodson is not going to return. And so there's no doubt that Indiana will have.
Even if it's not Indiana, though, I think other people are going to come calling at some point. You know what I mean? And that's, or it could be the NBA. Michigan lost to coach the NBA once upon a time too. And I think he'll be here for at least a few more years. I'm not, saying it's going to be next year or the year after that. But I mean, he's got a good head on his shoulders and and knows what he's doing and shown he can do a quick turnaround. Those guys are going to be in demand.
They will.
Let's see. Michigan State's they play Saturday at Illinois, and that looks like a loss. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll pull that off. But if they lose that,
no,
right, then they can really only afford to lose one more, and it probably couldn't beat a Michigan.
To be fair, it could go the other way a little bit too, where Michigan's won 5 games in a row by 4 points or less, right? At a certain point, it could go the opposite direction, and they could lose another stupid one like they lost to Minnesota. This league is and Purdue wasn't it Penn State they lost to at home, or was it Northwestern? I can't remember.
On the
beginning
Ohio
of the
State
season.
at home. Ohio State at home, and Penn State and Northwestern on the road.
Yeah. So, and Michigan State crapped their pants against Indiana. So I think that this league, while top to bottom, the Big Ten isn't as deep as it has been in the last few years. Michigan State's team is not that good, compared to like maybe the last 10 years. It's not one of the best Michigan State teams, but they're still sitting right at the top of the Big Ten. They won 9 in a row. So it's not as deep, but people can still lose. So a lot of basketball to play, but the Spartans look to be in the second place seat, and the Michigan is definitely in the driver's seat now.
And Purdue's schedule's not that brutal either to finish, so I wouldn't count them out yet either.
No, definitely not. But Sean, I think we promised that we would let you get to all the other important things you have to do. So Andrew and I can wrap this up from here. But before we let you go, I want you to go on record. Who wins the Big Ten?
Michigan.
And how far do they go in March Madness?
Oh, God, I can't even see the bracket. I need to see the bracket.
That's fair. See, okay, that's actually the answer I was hoping for.
I mean, if they get the right matchup, they get to the Final Four.
And there's no top dog in college basketball really this year. I mean, Duke is pretty good. The SEC is good, but like
Auburn's really good, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's not like UConn 2 years ago, right? Or even UConn last year. There's no team that I look at and be like, oh, so no chance Michigan can beat those guys. Especially with the size that they have. Usually a team like Michigan, they might run into trouble because of a lack of size. But they have Danny Wolf and Golden. They're going to match up physically with anybody.
Yeah, they can match up in a lot of ways. Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Thanks for coming, Sean. We'll talk to you again. That's Sean Windsor of the Detroit Free Press, obviously, our columnist. We'll take one more break, and then Andrew and I will wrap this up. Don't go anywhere. This is Say Oh Yes. All right, Andrew, brief game preview. Michigan, Ohio State coming up on Sunday, 1 p.m., CBS. All right, I wasn't going to do this, but I just saw that YouTube TV is kind of cutting the cord, or they did not come to an agreement. Did you see that on CBS? And YouTube TV does not have CBS coming into the most important 50 days of the year, the only 50 days of the year where I need CBS. And I have YouTube TV. So I'm distraught right now, to say the least. I pirate my mother's YouTube TV, and I don't want to pay. So we're going to have to figure something out.
Sounds like you're not really in a position to do much complaining, considering you're not even paying a cable bill. But this is like when people ask, these rights deals, right? Like, look at the leagues, look at the NBA, how much money they're getting for rights, or look how much money CBS pays for college basketball. This is why, because it's February. They just pulled the plug on YouTube TV and said, I don't even know what they're debating over. And at the end of the day, we're all just like pawns in their games, right? But they can say, hey, we have March Madness. Your customers will cancel if you don't have March Madness. What are we going to work out? That's leverage right there. And in a day and age where the streamers seem to have all the leverage, Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, this is like one of the things that the old school places still have working for them,
Totally right. And the reason I gave that little PSA is just in case you listening have YouTube TV and are trying to watch this game on Sunday, it could actually be unavailable, like immediately. And so I'm not in the behind the scenes. That was just an aside. Here's another interesting thing about this game, Andrew. Ohio State is 15-10. They're 7-7 in the league. We had just gotten done singing Michigan's praises for 30 minutes. Why does this ESPN matchup predictor have Ohio State as a 60% favorite? And why does KenPom have Ohio State as a 2-point favorite?
Because winning in the Big Ten is hard. I was just saying that, before the break. Anybody could trip up at any time in these tough environments. Michigan lost to Minnesota when they looked, Michigan was at its peak for the season, besides maybe like right now, would be the only other time that you could argue they were coming in higher. And they went to Minnesota and lost. Michigan State loses to Indiana at home. These games are there's an unpredictability to it. There's 3-point shooting variance, more so now than ever. And listen, I'm not an expert on all the KenPom, how the formulas work and stuff. Michigan isn't beating teams by 20 points convincingly, right? Like they're barely without Purdue. You take that win, but there's Penn State was not exactly one you write home about. So I think that some of the metrics, as far as, I'm not saying they're going to lose this game, but as far as matchup predictors and KenPom, they look at margin of victory, where the game was, different half scores, and do you let them come back at the end and all this stuff. So I think that's probably why the predictors are a little more favorable to Ohio State than Michigan.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I honestly kind of said that tongue in cheek because I was talking to another writer courtside before the game against Purdue, and I had predicted Michigan to beat Purdue by 2 points. Pat myself on the back. But then I was like, just so you know, I'm already prepared to pick against them on Sunday. You just see the spots. You just pick the spots, right? And Minnesota was a spot I did not see. But I remember telling my fiance's brother, my future brother-in-law, weeks before they played Purdue on the road. I'm like, you're about to see them get pummeled in a way that like you just won't even recognize. And he wouldn't believe it. He's younger. He's 20. He's naive, hopeful. And but I was like, no, there's just things. There's spots. It's basketball, just like you said. I mean, we are not surprised to see Ohio State favored. Now, can Michigan win? Of course. But does that mean they're going to? Not necessarily. And then you add in the Roddy Gale element of this, just a homecoming of sorts. And I mean, there is the human nature of a letdown spot after a top 10 win, right? I mean, you can only get up so many times. You got Michigan State coming next week. I mean, Purdue, Ohio State on the road, MSU at home. How many emotional games can you get up for in a row? And then you talked about it. They've played 12 games decided by 4 or less. They've played 5 games in a row that they've won by 4 or fewer. Even the best teams cannot keep flipping the coin. Like, eventually, you're going to get a bad bounce. A ball is going to roll out. It's going to hit off your knee. There's going to be a bad call. you're going to get screwed by the rest. What Dusty said before the season, he said, we don't want to be in one possession games, because if you're in one possession games, you're going to go just about 500. One year, maybe you'll be 8-4, but next year you will be 4-8. The water finds its level in those games that come down to the final minute, because it's just about, clearly the teams are evenly matched, right? That's why, or relatively on that day they are. And that's why it's down to the final minute. And sometimes they're going to make a play and sometimes you're going to make the play. And so you need to be able to put the stake in someone and hammer them and finish them when you have the opportunity. Michigan's had the opportunity about 15 times. And other than the Western Kentuckys of the world, they haven't really done it. And so if you're going to leave the door open for an Ohio State, you're going to play 5 games in a row that are a few points. One's going to tip the other way. One will eventually tip the other way.
Yeah, I mean, this game is kind of like the trappiest of all trap games in a way. That for that 1:00 Sunday CBS game, it's just always, the fans are up for it. It feels big on TV. And Ohio State, I'm looking at ESPN's bracketology thing right now. They're a 9 seed. They're in the tournament. So this is a tournament caliber team. I'm not super high on them. I think they're pretty average, and their record would say as such, 7-7 in the conference. A tournament team, a 9 seed beating, I don't know, what is Michigan now, like a 2 or 3 in the latest rankings? That's not unheard of. That's not like, oh, how did that happen? Especially when you put that in the other team's home building. Roddy Gale Jr. coming back and playing against his old team. There's a lot of things in Michigan, like you said, these close games. It's kind of like turnovers in football, right? One goes the other way. The guy hits the perfect timed peanut punch, and suddenly it's a completely different sport. The odds are like 80-20 versus 50-50. Things change very fast, and these close games are just a lot of variance. And Michigan, if the fans are being honest with themselves, are kind of due for one to go the opposite way after 5 in a row of pulling it out by 4 points. 4 points. I mean, yes, there was that buzzer beater that kind of throws it out of whack, but to have 5 games ended in a row and 4 points. 6 points is a close game. 8 points is kind of close. 4 points is a very close game, and Michigan has done it how many times in a row? It feels like the flip of the coin is destined to go against them one of these times. Maybe it's not Ohio State. Maybe they play a really good game against them, but one of these days it's going to burn them.
Yeah, that Penn State, that first 4-point win, they were down 5 with 2 minutes left. Then Rutgers, 3-point game. It was tied or 1 point in the second half. Then you move on to Oregon. They were trailing Oregon. They were up by 15, and then they were down in the second half. Then you go to Indiana. You were up 18. Then it's tied under 4, and then you go to Purdue, which was just a solid win. But time after time after time. It's just close. And then you look at Ohio State, who's been really solid at home. They just hammered Washington at home. That's a bad team. But before that, they beat Maryland at home by 3. Maryland is a very good team this year. They destroyed Iowa at home. They lost by 1 to Indiana at home. They lost by 2 to Oregon at home. They lost by, 7 to Michigan State, but I think that was free throws late. Against the top tier teams in the Big Ten, they've either beat them or they're inches away. And they beat Purdue on the road. This is a team that can hang with the top echelon of the Big Ten: Maryland, Michigan State, Michigan, Purdue. They're 2-2 against those teams. So I think, and so that's why.
Buckle in, Michigan fans.
Get ready to. Frankly, you could probably tune in with 4 minutes left, and it'll be a 1 possession game. You don't even need to see who goes up 15 or who goes down 15, because in the end, whichever team will probably come back, and it'll come down to the final 5 minutes.
You sound like every old guy talking about the NBA. You don't even need to watch the games. Watch the last 4 minutes.
Yeah, or I sound like a disgruntled beat writer who has thrown out 20 stories this year. Do you know how many stories have never seen the light of day? Not that they're great, but usually you're writing one story, and that's the story because you're watching what happens. But when they blow a 15-point lead 10 times, the stories change. And so maybe I should just wait to write. But then we're trying to get it at the buzzer. It's hard. It's tough business, tough gig. But the show goes on. So, Andrew, I think that's a good place to leave it. Anything else that we didn't touch on?
No, Michigan, things are about to get fun, right? They got Ohio State and Michigan State. They're 2 biggest rivals coming up in back-to-back games. Bit of a schedule break for Michigan. They get Ohio State on Sunday, and then don't play again until Friday. Michigan State, going into that rivalry game, gets a Saturday game, and then they play Tuesday, and then again Friday. So a bit of a tight turnaround. So Michigan should have some fresher legs for that game. We'll preview that next week. Michigan State, maybe even a crossover podcast with our Spartan Speak guys. We'll figure that out, something. But we'll be looking forward to that game next week. And in the meantime, enjoy what should be a close game.
I was just going to say that about next week. Either I will be in their feed or they will be in our feed, but there will be crossover of some sort because we know both programs pay attention to both programs. Don't kid yourself. We know everybody does it. So leading into the week, let's talk with the experts from the other side. So that'll do it for this episode of Hail Yes. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Imagine doing that right now. Right? As a personal favor to me or maybe to Andrew or Sean, right? Sean, who came on and dedicated his time. I bet you can do it in less than 30 seconds and it will literally make my day. So imagine how great could that be? Share it with a friend or family. We travel, at least I guess I travel the country with this team. And from Los Angeles to New York to Indiana to Ohio, and then wherever we're going in the tournament, we'll be back in Indy for the Big Ten tournament. And this team has been very kind and given us some great access. Got to sit down with Vlad Golden poolside in Los Angeles and just talk about his incredible journey from Russia to Connecticut to Texas to Florida to Michigan. I got to talk with Dusty May's wife. She told us all about the elementary school Dusty May boy that she met who had all the energy way back when. And his journey all to where he is now and their move to Santa Monica, driving across the country and just all her memories about their trip. And coming up this week, maybe Friday morning or possibly Saturday morning, it will be published. My conversation with Roddy Gale, who I joked with him about how Dusty got a pretty warm reception in Indiana and what is he expecting? And he said, "I'm not expecting any applause. Let's put it that way." And so he's still on great terms with teammates, with the coaches, his former teammate coaches. They said they all understand. Everybody in the business understands he's trying to do what's best for him. The fans, on the other hand, and that's why fans are fans, and they're allowed to be. They're not too pleased. So just wanted to peel the onion back a little bit on some of the things we've gotten to do this year, and more coming up. And really, you're only getting it in one place, and that's the Free Press. Just so you know, and that's here on Hail Yes. So keep it locked. We appreciate it. That's my long-winded diatribe to sign off. So for our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, for our executive editors all across the board, for our sports editor, Bill Bradley, for our audio engineer, Robin Chan, for our guest, Sean Windsor, our producer and editor, Andrew Burkle. I'm Tony Garcia. Thanks for listening. This is Hail Yes.